Shalom everyone, and thank you for joining me in the study of Parashat Behar-Bechukotai. These are the two Parashot that will end Sefer Vayikra, and it was a journey from the beginning of Sefer Vayikra to the end. And today we're going to discuss something that seems to be some kind of a discrepancy or perhaps redundancy, and that's what we will try to figure it out today. So the Torah begins with "V'zacharti et briti Yaakov ve'af et briti Yitzchak ve'af et briti Avraham ezkor ve'aretz ezkor." And I shall remember my covenant with Jacob, also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham shall remember, and also I will remember the land. So obviously when we read this pasuk, there are two questions that comes to mind. First, the order. It seems to be a reversed order, starting with Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham, where most of the times it's exactly the opposite. Chronologically speaking, it should start with Avraham, Isaac, and then Jacob. And the second question is, why do we need to mention the land? How exactly by remembering the land that's going to help us? And just in general, this is, besides the reversed order, this is a covenant that we refer to as Brit Avot, the covenant of our forefathers that remains for the Jewish people for eternity. So this is what we call Brit Avot, covenant of the forefathers. However, just really 3 psukim later, it says, "V'zacharti lahem brit rishonim," and I shall remember to them or for them the covenant of the ancients or the first ones. "Asher hotzetu otam me'eretz Mitzrayim," that I took them out from Mitzrayim, le'einei hagoyim, in front of all the other nations, liot lahem le'elokim, to be their God, ani Hashem, I am Hashem. So now we obviously need to ask ourselves a question. Where it says Brit Rishonim, the covenant with the first ones, or the ancient ones, is that the same like the forefathers that we just mentioned 3 psukim, 3 verses ago, or this is an additional covenant? If it's an additional covenant, who exactly are we, Hashem did this covenant with? Why do we need another covenant? So we're going to have all those questions floating around, and we will try to obviously address them. So let's see the Midrash. The Midrash in Shmot Rabbah says the following: "Uminayin shehakadosh baruch hu nishba lashvatim." How do we know that Hashem took an oath or made a covenant with the shvatim, with the tribes? Shene'emar, so it's quoting a verse from Chavakuk, "Shvuot matot omer sela." Matot, it can be, in Hebrew, it's a bit ambiguous. It can be mateh, a staff, like a stick, but also can be tribes. So shvuot, an oath, to the matot, to the shvatim, omer sela, Hashem says forever. Uminayin shekiyem HaKadosh Baruch Hu imahem brit, and how do we know that Hashem really established, erected a covenant with the shvatim, with the tribes? Shene'emar, "V'zacharti lahem brit rishonim, zu brit hashvatim." So the Midrash identifies brit rishonim, the covenant with the first ones, equal to shvatim. So now we have something interesting. There is a covenant with the forefathers, with Avraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or based on the verse with Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. Then, and God will remember them. And God will remember the covenant, and God will remember the land. So that's one. Then we have a second covenant, an additional covenant, a separate covenant God had with the tribes. And obviously we need to ask the question, what's the content of that covenant, of that Brit, and why do we need it? So, Ibn Ezra has a different view on this question of what is Brit Rishonim. And he suggests the following. He says, Brit Rishonim zot habrit hakruta beSinai. This is the covenant that Hashem did with the Jewish people on Sinai when we received the Torah. V'kara ze hador Rishonim. So why are they called Rishonim? Rishonim should be the founding fathers, right? Avraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why this generation that Hashem took from Mitzrayim, out from Mitzrayim, and told them to stand on Har Sinai, on the Sinai mountain, and to receive the Torah? Why are they called Rishonim, the first ones? He says, "Keneged abanim shiglu be'eretz oiveim." He says, because they are Rishonim for the generation to get out of Mitzrayim, and then their children that will go and enter the land of Israel, they will be expelled. So they are the first one versus the second ones, the second children. So this is one interpretation. Second interpretation, he says, V'yesh omrim al avot ha'olam. The Ibn Ezra says, he quotes another opinion that says that Brit Rishonim means what? The covenant, the Brit with the forefathers. So now let's focus first on his first interpretation. If we go back to the Pasuk, he says, V'zacharti lahem Brit Rishonim, and I shall remember to them, who are to them? To the children who are going to be exiled from the land of Israel, because that's what the Pasuk is talking about. And so I will remember to them what Brit Rishonim, what the generations before them did on Har Sinai, that they received the Torah with full faith, not knowing exactly what the Torah entails, and that I took them out from Mitzrayim, that generation that stood on Har Sinai, in front of the other nations, and I, to be their God, I am Hashem. So according to the Ibn Ezra, it makes a lot of sense, which means when Hashem will see the next generation that will be expelled from the land of Israel, he will remember the first generation that he took out of Mitzrayim, bunch of slaves, people who basically were born into slavery, had faith in God and in Moshe, went out of Mitzrayim, went to the desert, received the Torah. That was an amazing event. And an event that the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud in Shabbat, in page Beit 89, talks about the fact that when the Jews said Na'aseh v'nishma, that we will do and we will hear, even the angels were shocked. How can you say that? Like to say something that I will just accept the way it is, even without really knowing, because I want to be close to God. So really, an amazing commitment that the Jewish people showed, and Hashem remembers that. Hashem basically kept it in his files until that generation was expelled, so Hashem will remember what the Jewish people did, and he will have mercy on that generation. That sounds logical. The second interpretation says, Yesh omrim al avot ha'olam, which means Brit Rishonim goes back to what? To the forefathers. Now, it makes sense that God will remember it, but why to separate it into two psukim? Pasuk Membet, verse 42 says, V'zacharti et briti Yaakov, Yitzchak ve'Avraham, Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. So he mentioned them by name. So then to call it after that Brit Rishonim, it seems to be redundant, it seems to be superfluous. Why do we need it there? So the Ibn Ezra does not address this question. So let's see the HaChaim. The HaChaim interpret the verse in the following way. ואפשר לומר, and it's possible to say, שנתכוון על דרך אומרו, זכרתי לך חסד נעורייך, אהבת כלולותייך. He says, if you look at the pasuk, if you look at the verse, it says, וזכרתי, and I shall remember, וזכרתי. If you fast forward to Yirmiyah, to Jeremiah, it says, זכרתי, same word. Hashem says to the Jewish people through his prophet Jeremiah, I remember the kindness of your youth, the love of the day that we quote unquote got married. Meaning Hashem says to the Jewish people, I know you suffer now. I know you are about to be exiled from the land of Israel. I know that your Beit Mikdash is going to be destroyed, but I remember. I remember the time that you just followed me with tremendous faith and commitment. When? When you left Egypt. So, says HaChaim, Zacharti, I remembered. Zacharti, I remembered. So he put both of them together and he says, פירוש, שיזכור השם לדור האחרון, זכות דור ראשון שנכנס בברית עם השם באהבה רבה. ופירש מי הם הראשונים, בעל ברית, ואמר, אותם שהוצאתי אותם מארץ מצרים, ונתקדש באמצעותם אלוקים חיים. This is a beautiful interpretation. The HaChaim says, Brit Rishonim is the first generation that Hashem took from Mitzrayim. Very similar to the first interpretation of the Ibn Ezra. Sometimes, and we did it in Sefer Shmot, and we're probably going to do it in Sefer Bamidbar, in the next book that we're going to learn together, we will criticize that generation. The generation who went out of Egypt and tested God and tested Moshe and did all sorts of things. But sometimes we need to give them major credit. Just imagine, you're born into slavery. Your parents were slaves, your grandparents were slaves, your great-grandparents were slaves. And for generations, you are just waiting for some kind of redemption and it doesn't come. And then one day, someone comes and says, Hashem spoke to me and he says, we are leaving. The 10 plagues, and where are we going? Oh, to the desert. Are we taking food? Are we taking anything? Where are we going? We have no idea. Let's just follow him. That's what the generation of Yotzei Mitzrayim, of the people who went through Exodus, went through. This is tremendous faith and commitment and belief in Moshe and in God. And Hashem kept it in mind for generations. So now, when he sees that his children are going to be expelled from the land of Israel, he says to them, don't forget, I will never abandon you. You are going to be expelled because of whatever divine calculation. The Beit HaMikdash will be destroyed. But I will never abandon you because I remember Brit Rishonim, the commitment of the first generation who went out of Mitzrayim and receiving the Torah. And the HaChaim says, "V'nitkadesh be'emtzautam Elokim Chaim." God's name was sanctified through them. This first generation that had so many quote-unquote issues or challenges did something that God can never forget. They believed in him. Yeah, they tested him after that. But to leave Egypt, to leave the land that basically you grew up in, now the plagues basically destroyed the Egyptians, you could stay there, but to leave and to follow Moshe and to follow God and to accept the Torah and to become God's nation, Hashem will never forget that quote-unquote favor that the Jewish people did to him. So that's Brit Rishonim, according to the HaChaim. Now, the Chidushei HaGriz suggest the following. He wants to... So until now, we try to understand what is Brit Rishonim, the covenant with the first ones. So most of the interpretations basically says it's the first generation that went out of Egypt. Then we also have one interpretation that says maybe it's the forefathers, which creates a bit of complexity and a bit of complicated issue, because if it's the forefathers, we already mentioned it 3 verses before. But now we are going to try to understand why to mention the land. If you remember in verse 42, it says, "And I shall remember my covenant with Jacob, my covenant with Isaac, my covenant with Abraham shall I remember, and I shall remember the land." What does the land have anything to do with the covenant with the forefathers? So the Griz suggested the following. In Parashat Kitisa, that we saw in Shmot in chapter 32, it says, "Zchor, please God," when Moshe tried to convince God not to annihilate the Jewish people after Chet HaEgel, after the golden calf, Moshe told Hashem the following, "זכור לאברהם, ליצחק ולישראל עבדיך אשר נשבעת להם בך, ותדבר עליהם הרבה את זרעכם ככוכבי השמיים." Please God, remember to Abraham, to Isaac, to Yaakov, Israel, your servants, that you took an oath and you told them that your descendants will be multiple like the stars in the sky. וכל הארץ הזאת אשר אמרתי אתן לזרעכם, and this land that I told you I will give to your descendants, ונחלו לעולם, and they will inherit it forever. The Griz ask a very good question. He says, מה שייך טענת וכל הארץ הזאת לעניין שלא יכלה את ישראל? He asked the same question on this verse that we ask on our verse, which means Moshe mentions the land as part of him besieging God and basically appealing to God's mercy. Please God, don't forget the covenant with the forefathers and the covenant with the land. And the covenant with the land will save the Jewish people. Says the Griz, the land will save the Jewish people? Why do you need to mention it? I can understand that you want to mention the covenant with the forefathers because the forefathers created tremendous merit for the Jewish people. But the land? And we ask the same question about our pasuk. So let's see his answer. So he says the following, והנראה, and it seems, דהנה על הפסוק ואתה הניחה לי, ואיחר אפי בהם ואכלם, ואעשה אותך לגוי גדול. it במדרש רבה, פרשה מ"ד. On the verse, when Hashem says to Moshe after the golden calf, Hashem told Moshe, now leave me alone, and let my rage and my wrath go after the Jewish people, and I will, God forbid, annihilate them, and I will make you, Moshe, a great nation. The Midrash takes this verse and says the following, אמר רב יצחק, אמר משה, ריבון העולם, ולא אודה לך שם שנשבעת לעבוד וקיימת עמהם ברית, שנאמר וזכרתי את בריתי יעקב, כך אף לשבטים נשבעת וקיימת ברית עמהם. ומניין שהקדוש ברוך הוא קיים עמהם ברית, שנאמר וזכרתי להם ברית ראשונים, זו ברית השבטים. ולדבריך, הרי אתה מעמיד משבט לוי שאני משבטו, מה יש לך לומר לשבט ראובן ולשבטים אחרים? Amazing. I will translate. When Hashem says to Moshe, leave me alone, let me annihilate the Jewish people, and we will create a new nation from you. Moshe is saying to Hashem the following, wait. If you had a covenant only with the forefathers, I would agree with you. You can annihilate the Jewish people, God forbid, and make another Jewish nation for me. Why? Because I am the child of Avram, Isaac, and Jacob. No problem. However, God, don't forget, you made a covenant with the tribes. Each tribe, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Naphtali, Gad, Zvulun, Reuven, Yosef. You made a covenant with each one of them that you will give them the land. Now, if you, God forbid, annihilate everyone, and you just take me to be the founder of the new Jewish people, there is a problem. I am from the tribe of Levi. So you fulfill your covenant with the tribe of Levi. But what about Reuven? What about Shimon? What about Yehuda? What about Yosef? You made a covenant with them too. You cannot nullify your covenant with them. And take a look what the Midrash says. אמר רב יצחק, אותה שעה לא היה יכול להשיבו. This is amazing. God, when he heard what Moshe's claim, he couldn't answer him. Moshe was correct. So Moshe used the covenant of the tribes, or with the tribes. And what was the covenant with the tribes? Now we got the content. It's the land. It seems to be that Moshe basically says to God, look, you promised the land to each tribe. So if you annihilate them and you give it only to me, you nullified your covenant. Which means, what was the saving grace of the Jewish people? The covenant with each tribe about what? The land of Israel. The land of Israel was the saving grace for the Jewish people. And then אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא יפה, אמרת מיד וינחם השם. And then Hashem says to Moshe, shkoyach, you did well. You convinced me. I'm not going to annihilate the Jewish people because of the covenant between me and each tribe about the land of Israel. והנה ברית זו שכרותה לשבטים איתה בפירוש הרייבד, קראת הקדוש ברוך הוא ברית שלא יחלה את זרעם, גמירי דלא קלה שבטה. So he says the covenant between Hashem and the tribes is that he will not annihilate their descendants. And we'll talk about the land in a minute. Vita bebaba batra, and it says in the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Baba Batra, Gmiri de lo kala shifta, that no tribe, God forbid, will be annihilated. ויש לעיין, he says, אם רק לעניין זה נאמר ברית השבטים, או נאמר ברית זה גם לעניינים אחרים. He says, the Greece says, you know what, 1 second. Is the content of that brit was only not to annihilate an entire tribe, or it was something else too? So he says, והראיה לזה מהדאית בספרי דברים, על הפסוק, ראה נתתי לפניכם את הארץ, בואו ורשו את הארץ אשר נשבע השם לאבותיכם, לאברהם, ליצחק וליעקב, לתת להם ולזרעם אחריהם. So the Sifrei, which is a Midrash Tanaim, which was composed the 1st to 2nd century in Eretz Israel, it says on the verse, look, see, I gave in front of you the land, come and inherit the land and conquer the land that I promise to your forefathers to give to them and to the descendants after them, איתה בספרי, אשר נשבע השם לאבותינו, שאין תלמוד לומר לאברהם, ליצחק וליעקב, אם כן, מה תלמוד לומר לאבותיכם? אם לעניין שבועת אבות כבר נאמר, אלא זו ברית השבטים, שנאמר שבועות מטות אומר סלע. Basically, the ספרי, we need to look at the pasuk. If you look at the second sentence, towards the end, it says, אשר נשבע השם, that Hashem took an oath to whom? לאבותיכם, to your forefathers, and then it says, לאברהם, ליצחק וליעקב. That's superfluous. If we are talking only about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it should say what? אשר נשבע לאברהם, ליצחק וליעקב, without אבותיכם, your forefathers. Therefore, the Sifrei understands that what? That you have two covenants here. One with your avotechem, which means the shvatim, the tribes, and the other one is this general covenant between God and the forefathers. Arei says, the Brit HaShvatim היה לירושת הארץ ולחלוקתה. So now he says that the content of this covenant between God and the tribes was not only that God will not annihilate the tribe, God forbid, but also that he will give them the land of Israel. והייתה שבועה וברית לשבטים, שירשו את הארץ ויחלקו אותה להם. וזהו דכתיב, בואו ורשו את הארץ אשר נשבע השם לאבותיכם, לתת להם ולזרם אחריהם, ושבועה זו היא ברית השבטים כמפורש בספרי. ולפי זה נראה עוד, דאדרבה, דברית השבטים הוא לירושת וחלוקת הארץ, ומשום זה הוא דלא קלה שפטה. The Greeks said something that it's incredible. Sometimes we look at the land of Israel as just like a gift. God gave us as a gift because he loved the forefathers and he wants the Jewish people to be on a land, and this land was chosen by him, and this is how we can fulfill our spiritual and national potential. But it's much more than that. The land of Israel is the cause for the second stage in the covenant, that God will not annihilate the tribe. The fact that God promised the land of Israel to each tribe, then God became obligated to keep each tribe intact and not, God forbid, to annihilate it. This is the centrality of the land of Israel in the survival of the Jewish people. This is not just a place to be safe. It's not just a place for us to thrive. It's the land that gives us life. And the Greece continues. And he says, ולפי זה נראה, and according to what I said before, it seems that what? דמה שאמר משה וכל הארץ הזאת אשר נשבעתי אתן לזרעכם ונחלו לעולם, זהו המבואר במדרש רבה, דמה שהשיב על מה שאמר לו השם, אעשה אותך לגוי גדול, אף ברית כרותה לשבטים, ומה יהיה על שבטים אחרים, וזהו שאמר, דבהה דהובטחה ירושת הארץ. הרי בירושה זו נאמר, ברית לשבטים שירשו יחלקוה, ואם כן מה יהיה על ברית השבטים זה. Basically, when Moshe says to Hashem, you can't annihilate those Jewish people and make another nation for me, because you promised each tribe not only that they will be there, but they will get a piece of the land. And if I'm the only one to inherit the land, what about the other Shvatim? So if this is true, we can look at now at the two verses, verse 42 and verse 45, and can understand how they complement each other. The verse in 42, if we'll go back, וזכרתי את בריתי יעקב ואף את בריתי יצחק ואף את בריתי אברהם אזכור. We have the covenant with all the fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And then, והארץ אזכור. What's the land is doing here? Because the land is part of the covenant with the forefathers as well. And the covenant with the forefathers basically is what? Is the gift of life to the Jewish people, besides the covenant with the forefathers. And then we have another covenant with the Shvatim. Because Hashem gave the land not only to the forefathers, but he promised it to each tribe, so then none of the tribes will cease to exist, God forbid. That's how the Greeks reads these two verses. Now take a look at it. This idea is fully illustrated in Tehillim, in Psalms. King David says to Hashem, Ata, you God, takum, stand up, so to speak, terachem Tzion, have compassion and mercy on Zion, ki et lechanena kiva moed, because it's time to show grace and kindness to Zion, kiva moed, because it's time. And now, why is that time? Why now? Says David, כי רצו עבדיך את אבניה ואת עפרה יחוננו. Because your servants, God, your nation, they want that they רצו from the word רצון and תפילה, they prayed, and also they have a tremendous desire for its stones, and they will, at עפרה יחוננו, so the word יחוננו can be many things. It can be like the word תחינה, petition, which means they daven for it, or from the word chen, which means grace, meaning even in the dust, in the ashes, in the earth of the land of Israel, we see grace. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the author of the Kuzari, who lived in the 11th and the 12th century, when he describes the land of Israel to the king of Kuzar, he talks about a beauty of the land of Israel, the spiritual heights that you can accomplish while being there. He describes it as when he walks on a path that Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Yoshua walked on, and Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Sometimes we take it into granted, but every stone has a story. Every stone carries history, carries spiritual opportunity. So David HaMelech says to Hashem, it's time for you to bring redemption, and you know why? Because the people are back in the land. The people has a tremendous desire to be connected to the land of Israel. Again, we see the land is the cause of redemption. And here, take a look at the Kuzari. ובהערת בני אדם והתעוררותם אל אהבת המקום ההוא הקדוש, when the people of Israel, when Am Yisrael will wake up, you need to wake up. Galut, being in exile, it's not our natural place. Our natural place as a nation is in our land. The land that was chosen by God. This is the holy land that we have. הנחץ העניין המיוחד, שכר גדול וגמול רב, כמו שנאמר, אתה תקום תרחם ציון כי עת לחננה קיבה מועד, כי רצו עבדיך את אבניה ואת עפרה יחוננו. He quotes the pasuk that we brought from Tehillim, and he says, רוצה לומר, כי ירושלים אומנם תיבנה, you know when Jerusalem will be built? כשיחשפו בני ישראל לה תכלית הכוסף. When the Jewish people will really have a tremendous desire to be in Yerushalayim. עד שיחוננו אבניה ועפרה. Until they will basically יחוננו אבניה ועפרה, that they will make a petition even for the dust and the earth and the earth of the land of Israel. We just celebrated Yom Yerushalayim, the day of the unification of Jerusalem. We had a desire to be there. We wanted to be united. We understand the history and the opportunities that Yerushalayim presents to us, nationally, spiritually, religiously. Says the Kuzari, and this is an incredible thing, if we want Yerushalayim to be built, if we want redemption, we need to show our love and commitment to the land of Israel, to the state of Israel. Again, it's not just a place to live in. It's the chosen place by God. And Yerushalayim, it's the tip. Yerushalayim is just the ultimate prize for the land of Israel. The Malbim says, כי רצו עבדיך את אבניה What does it mean, ratzu? So ratzu is always want. So he says, V'chen toshiem, you God going to redeem them. מצד העם שבעוונותיהם החרבת את ציון. You God destroyed the Beit HaMikdash and you expelled the Jewish people from the land because of their sins. But now, שהם כבר רצו ופייסו את אבניה, שתחילה נחרבה ציון לרצות על עוונותיהם, ושפך השם חמתו על העצים והאבנים, ואחרי זה רצו הם את אבניה שנשפך דמם בעבור אבני ירושלים ועל אמונתם, ואת עפרה יכוננו שמתאבלים תמיד עליה ונושקים את עפרה. This is an incredible Malbim, and I will explain. The Malbim says, and it's based on the Gemara, that when Hashem was so angry with the Jewish people, he could obviously annihilate them. But instead, what did he do? He basically took his rage due to the sins that Am Yisrael performed. He took his rage and he threw it on the stones, on the walls, on the buildings. Instead of, God forbid, annihilating the Jewish people, he basically took his quote-unquote anger on the stones and the city. So the city was destroyed, the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and the Jewish people were expelled, but they were not killed. They were not annihilated. The first thing in redemption is that the Jewish people needs to, in a way, ask for forgiveness from those stones, the walls, the homes that were destroyed because of them. And how do you ask for forgiveness from a wall that is destroyed? Rebuild it. When you rebuild it, this is the best ask for forgiveness, because you correct what you did wrong. Says the Malbim, it's time, God, for you to redeem us. And why? Because the people are moving. The people are moving towards the land of Israel and they want to build it. And the Malbim said it more than 100 years ago. And now, look at this month. When we had Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim. It's all about the land of Israel. It's all about the state of Israel. It's all about our tremendous desire as the children of this land to come back home and to build it. Yes, there are challenges, issues, difficulties, so many difficulties. But we are here. And we see the land of Israel and we see its beauty. We never forgot Yerushalayim. אם אשכחך ירושלים, תשכח ימיני. If I'll forget you, O Jerusalem, I will forget my right hand. Jews for millennia never forget where they came from. And now we are coming back. So the redemption, it's on its way. כי רצו עבדיך את אבניה ואת עפרה יכוננו. We have two covenants. One covenant is with the forefathers, but then there is the covenant with the tribes. The covenant with the tribes that it's comprised by two main components. First, tribes, you need to conquer this land, you need to dwell in this land. And then, that will be the secret of your survival, but not only your survival, but the way for you to thrive. So we have two covenants. And we, as the children of the forefathers and the children of the heads of the tribes, we must take now the mission to our hands, to build, to be unified, to unify this nation by building it together, by building a beautiful state of Israel, a beautiful land of Israel, a land of Israel that has two covenants, the covenant with the forefathers and the covenant with the tribes. Thank you.